Before I start, I will be sharing my time with the honourable member, my colleague from Huron, Bruce. I'm pleased to rise today on our Opposition Day motion. You know, the House calling on the Liberal government to stop plagiarizing Trudeau's failed policies and recognize deficits drive investment and jobs down and the cost of living up. I'm going to start with a quote from the good Mr. Milton Friedman. He says, "Keep your eye on one thing and one thing only. How much government is spending, because that's the true tax. If you're not paying for it in the form of explicit taxes, you're paying for it indirectly in the form of inflation or in the form of borrowing." And that is dead on to what is happening right now, as it did in the past 10 years with this same Liberal government. It's not a different Liberal government. It's not a new government. It's the same Liberal government, the same tax and spend Liberal government. Now, in 2015, the Prime Minister was well known for stating in response to a question about his cabinet makeup, because it's 2015. But that is what this government seems to be saying right now about its continual spending, out of control deficits, because it's 2025. And I say that because it's the same term and it's the same Liberal government. Not a new plan, it's the same tired cabinet. The same old finance minister who won't answer what the deficit will be. Asked repeatedly in committee, what will the deficit be? We didn't get a response that Canadians deserve. Instead, he told Canadians they should rejoice at our fiscal situation. Yes, rejoice at rising unemployment. Rejoice at the highest youth unemployment in decades. Rejoice at the doubling of deficits. And again, this is the Minister of Finance telling Canadians they should be happy with what's going on. They should rejoice at our fiscal situation. Rejoice that the interest on the Liberal debt is going to be $82 billion a year by 2030. Put it in perspective, that's about $3,000 for every taxpayer, right off the bat, just for interest on the Liberal debt. $3,000 out of their pockets, and they should rejoice. They should rejoice at the fact that the last 2 years for GDP per capita, so per person, economic growth in Canada, it's shrunk by almost 3%. Canadians should rejoice about being poor, according to the Minister of Finance. And they should rejoice over the fact for the last 5 years, which coincides with the 5 years that the current Prime Minister was advising the Liberal government on economic policy, has been the worst 5 years for per capita GDP growth since the Great Depression. Think about that, worse than the 5 years covering the 08-09 economic crash. Yes, we should rejoice. Same as the old finance minister who got, of course, demoted and is now off on a special invoice or envoy somewhere. We should be happy. We've never had it so good. So to every 30-year-old living in their mom's basement because they can't afford to move out, make sure you rejoice and thank this Liberal government, as they are saying. To the 2 million Canadians lining up every single month at a food bank, that's 1 out of every 20 Canadians in the entire country lining up at a food bank. Make sure you take time while you're lining up to rejoice, as the finance minister says. Mortgage delinquencies have almost tripled in parts of the country in the last 2 years. So as you're packing up your house because you can't afford it anymore and moving into a moving van to either luckily maybe move it into your parents' basement or out on the street, I hope you'll take time, as the finance minister suggests, and enjoy the good times and rejoice and be thankful for the great economic times that the Liberals are delivering. Now, there's a lot of things I can agree with the government, and I have voted with some items, I know, but there's a lot I disagree with. And that's fine, we can disagree and disagree. I just want this government to be truthful to Canadians. Like, don't sit here in the House and for years defending their carbon tax, telling Conservatives that we're climate deniers or we only want to see the world burn if we want to take our kids on a summer vacation. Don't sit here and tell Canadians that their carbon tax is going to prevent forest fires or flooding. Be honest with Canadians. Because we saw what the government did for years. They went after everyone who dared go after their dogma of the carbon tax. And then what happens the second it became unpopular? Oh, they're patting themselves on the back for canceling the carbon tax. A year ago, if you were against the carbon tax, we saw the old health minister, Mark Holland, saying Canadians were going to burn the world down if they took their kids on a summer drive. Now it's thank us for getting rid of the carbon tax. Don't sit here in the House, as we see the Liberals, pretending that you're pro-oil, pro-Alberta, or pro-energy. They sit here and say there's no proponents for a new pipeline, but at the same time refuse to repeal C-69, the No New Pipeline bill. They refuse to repeal C-48, which bans tankers taking Alberta oil off the BC coast, but of course it still allows U.S. tankers off there. They refuse to repeal the emissions and production cap. The emissions production cap that the Conference Board of Canada says will cost over 100,000 jobs in Canada. So just be honest. Don't sit here and say, oh, we love oil and gas if only we had a proponent to build a pipeline. Liberals are all for oil as long as it stays politely in the ground, it seems. Their position very much with oil and gas is very like, we'll push you down the stairs, but make sure you pat me on the back for calling 911 to help you afterwards. And that's what they seem to be doing with the oil and gas. We're going to be an energy superpower. We're going to develop oil and gas, but we're going to keep C-69, C-48 into production cap. And it won't be their fault that no one steps up in the private sector. The capital gains tax, another one. I just want the government to be honest. We heard the old finance minister say basically Canadians were going to be living behind gated communities to keep out lower income people who wanted to burn them down unless we had this capital gains tax. She stated we could finance it by taking on more debt, but that would place an unfair burden on our younger generations. But they're going to add $60 billion of debt this year alone. She then urged Canadians to mark politicians who voted against the capital gains tax increase. The current finance minister says our capital gains tax change will help Canadians, it will fight for Canadians, it will fight for the middle class. He goes on to state, can members believe Conservatives voted against the capital gains tax and tax fairness? And they were going to increase investment in Canada because their new capital gains tax would ask the wealthiest to pay a bit more to fund investments. Move ahead a couple months, and the same finance minister, same one who says we should rejoice at rising unemployment, that auto workers, I guess, should rejoice that we're going to have a permanent export tax on their cars, permanent tariffs is going to cause the industry to collapse. He says, oh, capping the capital gains tax, we're supporting builders and investment entrepreneurs. Is there any reason we doubt the Liberals when they say they're going to build the fastest growing economy in the G7? While at the same time they bring in massive deficits that's going to drive out private sector investment. Their policies are causing massive record increases to use of the food bank. Is there any reason no one trusts the Liberals? Everything was all in on the carbon tax, the capital gains tax. Everything, all this borrowing that we're going to do was going to drive investment into Canada. And yet we've seen under the Liberals a $500 billion net investment flee the country with the Prime Minister promising another $1 trillion will flee Canada into the U.S. under their watch. It's clear, Mr. Speaker, we need a change. It's clear the government has to end their Trudeau-era policies and get real with Canadians. Be honest with Canadians, be upfront. Change the way before it's too late. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, when I heard the member speak, he talked about some of the challenges that exist in the country, and the government by no means suggests that it's perfect out there. The government is working within the realities, trying to meet Canadians where they're at, ensure that we have programs. That's why we've reduced taxes for 22 million Canadians. We've removed the GST from first-time home buyers for that 30-year-old that is trying to save up to be able to buy a home. We've actually introduced measures that member hopefully is telling his own constituents about. But, you know, if you're one of the 7 million Canadian seniors who receive old age security, that member voted against that. If you are one of the 5.1 million Canadian children that are in receipt of the Canadian Child Benefit, that member voted against it. If you are one of the over 1 million Canadians that are now receiving dental support, that member voted against it. But what I find facetious about this entire debate is that member ran on a platform of actually promising $106 billion of new spending if a Conservative government were actually in these seats. How does he stand up and be able to say these things with a straight face?
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Well, first of all, I'd like to remind the member opposite, if the Liberals had not cratered our economy, they would not have to be providing so much in welfare-type services to Canadians. The reality is there can be good spending if it is for actual investments that produce productivity, if it goes toward reducing regulations, if it goes toward perhaps repealing C-69, C-48, and the emissions cap, which would be the greatest thing to unleash prosperity across the country. This government has done nothing but add on red tape, regulations, and everything possible to destroy the economy, and the results show massive unemployment increases, increases in youth unemployment, and massive increases in debt.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, it's concerning because I see that the Liberals are cutting measures that might create a great deal of revenue, like, for example, the counter tariffs that never came about or the digital services tax. Earlier, I heard from the Leader of the Opposition, and I asked him how he would give money back to Quebec's and Canadians, and he said more about cuts. So really, I'd like to ask my colleague what would be the concrete measures to invest in the economy, to stimulate the economy, to encourage investors to invest and develop businesses, because I'm not hearing that from the Conservatives.
For Edmonton West.
I'd like to thank my colleague from Drummond for his question. Perhaps he hasn't been listening. We've been very clear. We can grow the economy by cutting the red tape, cutting the job-killing regulations that reduce investment, cutting taxes so that we are competitive with international competitors, and having a business environment where people will invest and create jobs in this country, such as getting rid of C-48, the job-killing, pipeline-killing C-69, and the oil and gas production gap, which, by the way, produces the most wealth and is the main driver of equalization rates to his province.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Edmonton West for the speech. The world over, Mr. Speaker, shares or exports energy. Even developing nations do that. How is it that we are not doing that? The question I have for the member is, can he walk us through how repealing liberal anti-energy laws would help restore investment and job growth in regions like Windsor, Ontario, and Alberta?
Member for Edmonton West.
I'd like to thank my colleague from Windsor West for his tough but fair question. Our energy industry is waiting to be unleashed. The International Energy Agency says we're not going to see peak oil to 2050, unlike the former Liberal Minister of Resource who said it was going to peak last year. We're going to see decades more growth in demand for oil. Canada can be the country that delivers that oil in an environmental way and a way that's with ethics. Instead of giving money to dictators that we're doing right now through the Liberal oil and gas cap, Canada can produce that oil for the free world. Canada can create that wealth here in the country that's going to drive investment, wealth for Canadians, and job for Canadians as well. Thank you.